to get us started, let's go for it.
Great. Thank you, Ellen, and welcome everyone. We have Mary Lippitt here today. Mary is the president of Enterprise Management Limited, an international consulting firm specializing in organizational effectiveness and the execution of change. She has taught at George Washington University, Georgetown University, the University of South Florida, and St. Thomas University. She has conducted research on 6,000 leaders to examine business priority orientations to ensure strategic alignment. Mary has published the award-winning Leadership, Saving the Herd, a business fable along with the key questions to ensure change execution. Mary's groundbreaking ideas have been featured in publications such as Leader to Leader, Executive Excellence, the Journal of Business Strategy, and McGraw-Hill's Leadership Today. She resides in Tampa and enjoys spending time with her grandsons, gardening, and attending the theater. Please join me in giving her a warm Zoom welcome.
Thank you so very much. I would like to add that my special achievement is not professional. I am actually Julie Tallman's mother. So I have the joy of also having a larger family with a son-in-law that teaches at App State and two grandsons. So lots of fun. But what I'd like to do today is to talk to you about the keys, and I'm going to focus on executing change. A lot of people talk about visioning change, and we'll talk about that later because I have some concerns about that. And I will admit to some biases up front. A lot of people will say that change has to come from the top. I am a firm believer that change can be introduced at any level of the organization. And I think that now we can see with improvements, quality circles, that it can be done. And so it's not just a top level kind of exercise. It really needs to be done throughout the organization. So to get started, excuse me, I would like you to cross your arms. Just put it in front, like cross your arms. Now would you look down and see what arm is on top? Okay. Now I'd like you to recross your arms with the other arm on top. For me, I can't do it very well the first time. I need practice. And I'm going to suggest that when we're talking about change, we're talking about something a lot more complicated than crossing our arms. And that is the reason why 50% of change fails. A lot of people use these statistics, 70%, which it has been validated in the past, but I think some of the newer studies talk about 50%. Now, since I'm talking to you all, I'd like to mention that in 2025, there was a new book called Intelligent Change, and it studied 60 IT projects. And the finding was interesting. Only 7% of the 60 projects were on time, on budget, and delivered as expected. And I'm not sure you'll be too surprised to find that the primary reason that the IT projects did not fulfill the timeliness, the budget, and the expectations, 59% of those problems that derailed the IT project temporarily or permanently, I'm not going to distinguish, was budget, resources. And it's really interesting to me to see how much money an organization spends on the launch of a project versus the actual execution of the project. And what I have found is that there's some 5 different factors or components that I think need to be considered before we actually launch a change. So I'm going to suggest that before we get started with a change initiative, we need to really collect information from all stakeholders and adjust continually. It's interesting that many people are aware that when we launch a rocket, that it's off course 97% of the time, because it always takes little adjustments to keep it on course. but we don't really seem to do that within our management of change projects. We tend to think that we started with a certain vision and a certain promise, and we have to keep that going, that we don't make the adjustments that are necessary. And the other premise I have is that not everyone can know everything. I have to say that I have some basic knowledge, but I have actually been able to lead a change project when I didn't have anywhere near the mastery that the people that was on the team was actually able to provide. So there's something about collecting information and making sure it's from all stakeholders that doesn't always make a large impression so that people do the full collection in advance. So the diagram on the slide is trying to say, hey, we need to make the midterm course corrections. We can't really just say we're starting with something and it's going to go exactly as planned. Most time I've found that at least 30% of these time has to be extended because of glitches, changes, whatever. So starting, you got to build in some interesting time lag. So this is the model that I've been using. I developed it in 1987, so I've been using it for more than a few years now. And it was originally called Managing Complex Change. But what I found was that people felt that managing could be done with delegating. And what really is important with complex change is that the leader needs to stay involved because things are adjusting, things are changing. And so these 5 components suggest what we need to pay attention to in advance, but also all throughout the project, because things do change. I might have a certain talent that I'm relying on. They may get ill, they may leave or retire. Things are always in flux, and we don't understand how much that can alter the success of a project. So what I would like to do with our time today is to look at each one of these, because they really have a lot of nuance to them that can't be captured in one word. I will say that this is a chart that I've shown to a lot of people, and the initial reaction I get is, that's not me. I have 2 missing. So if you have more than one that is not in place, my suggestion is to start from the left and move toward the right. So if we have an understanding of what we want to do, we have the skills to do them, the capabilities, we have the incentives, we have the resources, and we have a good action plan, we'll have success. But if people don't understand the vision, there's just going to be a lot of confusion. And it's interesting to me to see that many people who are confused are a little late in understanding that they are confused, number one. And number two, they're a little bit resistant to mention, that there's a question in their mind. I mean, the old story of the emperor without clothes can also apply to visions. People won't admit what they're actually experiencing. So if vision's missing, we have confusion. If we know what to do, but we don't know how to do it, we don't have the capabilities, then we're going to have anxiety. I don't want to be put in a position where I know I'm going to fail, and particularly fail in front of my colleagues. So we have the vision and we have the capabilities. The question is going to be, what are the incentives? I'm going to look particularly at that, because actually, in my experience, the incentives are one of the biggest reasons for change to fail. And so if we don't have an incentive, the question is, why should I get involved? Why should I do this work in addition to my other tasks? What's in it for me? It's interesting to me to see that a lot of the incentives are just a repeat of what the business goal is. It hasn't been tailored to the people who are actually implementing. And we'll talk about that some more. So if I have the vision, the capabilities, so I know what to do, I know how to do it, and I want to do it, then the next question is, do I have the resources? And if I'm all excited about doing something and nobody gives me the resources, then I will experience frustration. And I don't mean to say just you'll see it in the culture. You'll see it in the whole team that there's some kind of sense of, okay. I actually had a client and he said, Mary, we're on the B team. I didn't know what it was. So what's the B team? He says, oh, we be here when it starts. We be here when it ends. We're just going to wait it out. And the average is that after 3 months, if you haven't shown some progress, people tend to revert back to the B team. So in your planning, my recommendation is to have early wins, obviously, and communicate them well. So if you have, I know what to do, the vision, I know how to do it, I know want to do it, and I have the resources, but I don't have any sense of how to get things done. I don't know what the critical path is. I don't know what my accountabilities are. I don't know what the metrics I'm going to be measured on. I don't know really who I'm working with or when I'm supposed to be doing things. It was an interesting situation. I was working with one group and they wanted to introduce a new accounting system. Sounds good. But they wanted to introduce it in December. In December, the accounting department is particularly busy with end of year things. It was not a good plan. I'm not saying that the details were bad. It was a timing issue. And I would think that at a university such as App State, you would not want to introduce some things at the beginning of the school year. I mean, that's part of action planning. So if you don't have the action planning, people get frustrated and it's sort of like, okay, we're going in this direction. Oh, no, wait a minute. Now we're going this direction. Oh, now we're going this direction. And people lose that momentum, that level of energy and that commitment to get things done. So what I'd like to do is take a look at each one of these individually. The choice for vision is either I'm clear about what I want to accomplish and I know how it's going to get accomplished, or I'm confused. So what I would like to suggest to you is that the vision can be confusing. I worked for a company that was introducing an ERP program at the same time they wanted to do an IPO. Well, you know this better than I do, but an ERP program takes resources. Resources usually takes funding, it takes talent, it takes equipment, facilities, a lot of things. But if you're doing an IPO, you want to curtail the budget. So you have one part of the organization saying, let's spend, let's streamline, let's get things better. And by the way, it was a franchise operation. So they didn't even have all the data in one file. They had one for corporate-owned stores, but then they had one for different franchises. But even the different franchises had different contracts. So the idea of just pulling everything together into one simple file was truly not reasonable. And what I will say is that the ERP program got cut to make their financial standing more impressive for the IPO. So again, are we clear about the feasibility of what we're trying to do? Is it timed well? What is actually the highest priority? And sometimes people aren't really sure what a high priority is. And there are two things I look for in an organization: what gets funding and who got promoted last. It's a very interesting question to ask an organization, who got promoted last, because it tells you what skills, what abilities, and what accomplishments are truly being sought. And if there is a discord between what people say they want and who gets rewarded, then there'll be more confusion. Do I do what you say or do I do what I see happening? So vision is also something that has historically been standardized. There was an actual meeting of chief executive officers, and every one of them had a vision of being the world's best in blank industry, or being the highest quality in blank industry. We really need to go beyond that. I actually had a client whose vision was to empower, free, and serve. And doesn't that sound great? wow. And everybody heard it. And he was a charismatic speaker and he did a great job, getting everyone excited. They were big signs in the cafeteria. There were all these things all going on. And the trouble was, people thought, oh, I'm going to be empowered to do my job. I'm going to be free to do it so I can serve the customers. And it was really interesting. I met with the executive team and I asked the vice presidents, what does empower, free, and serve mean? Because I didn't know. And they didn't know either. It was to empower them to work 7 days, sell 7 days a week instead of 6. They were going to open some new distribution centers to serve the customers, and they were going to do some more things around e-commerce. I don't know if that was a good plan or not, but it certainly is not captured in a vision of empower, free, and serve, in my mind. So we have to be very clear, very specific, and not fall for the let's do a vision statement that's exciting. So after we get the vision statement and it's all well laid out, well detailed, people understand it, then the next question becomes, do we have the skills to do it? Or particularly the core skills. I mean, I can outsource some skills, but do we have the core skills? And it's interesting to me that some of those realities is when I don't have the confidence to do a job, I sort of become passive because I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want you to know that I don't know something. And the other part about skills is what level of skill do you have? Is it a basic level? Is it an advanced level? Or is it purely an expertise level? And I will just say very few projects require a lot of experts. So the question is, do I need basic skills or do I need just the proficiency? Have we thought that out? Have we also decided how we're using the talent we have? If I have one person with a particular talent and I put them on 3 projects, something's going to fall through the cracks. We have to do a better job of skills training and assessment. I worked for a client where they were trying to bring everybody into headquarters and instead of having a distributed kind of activity. And it was great. And they were told, oh, we're going to be a self-managed team. Wonderful. I like the idea of being autonomous. The trouble is they didn't tell them how to be a self-managed team. So there's a lot around skills that, I don't know, it gets skipped over rather easily because the assumption is everybody knows how to do their job. I don't have to tell them. I don't have to really develop them. Or if they actually need development, do I give them the time to develop before I launch the change effort? So the question is, what is your skill? What is your talent base? What is your bench strength? And make sure that you're not overcommitting it. Because if I have a job and you're asking me to work on 3 projects, something will suffer. So again, skills become something very important. And it's, again, not thought of frequently when we do planning for projects. This is the most interesting one that's overlooked. The incentive usually is something like, we're going to be the world's best, or we're going to get ranked by US News and Report even higher than the university is ranked now, or something that is really very good, but it isn't personal enough. And so a lot of people use the word motivation here, but motivation is something that's very short term. I could go to a football game, I get really motivated. It doesn't last for a week. I could be very excited with the outcome that's promised, but then it's going to take longer than I thought, and then I could become demotivated. So I'm talking about incentives, and particularly intangible incentives, which means what is it that it's going to do for me? And that doesn't mean personally. It could be for my team. It could be for my customer base. It could be for the students. It could be for the faculty. Or it could be something that says, hey, this is a project that will help me grow in my professional career. But we have to get into what does it mean? And so one of the things that I really will stress is the importance of asking questions about what can go wrong. A lot of people, when they start a change effort, they start talking about, will you support this? And everybody says, yeah. They don't know what they're saying because they haven't got the full plan. But even if they did have the full plan, they think it's a great idea. that wanes. It doesn't last until I decide how it's going to help me. And we can easily ask those questions. A lot of people don't want to say something negative, but you can appoint people as devil's advocate, or you could ask for what's the best case, the likely case, and the worst case. And there's a story about a CEO of a steel company, and they were going to merge with another company. He had an executive meeting, and he said, "How many of you are supporting this?" And we go, "Yeah, yeah." And he said, "What could go wrong?" And nobody could say anything. And he was wise enough to know if we can't identify the risks, we don't know enough about the change to start implementing it. So this incentives piece needs a lot more attention than is normally given to it. When we're off by time or budget or whatever else, we just say, "Hey, we're doing this for the university," and that may work for some people, but it may not work for everybody. So let's ask more questions about what could go wrong or what are your concerns. And then we can find out how to bridge that chasm if there is one. Because there are a lot of things we can do to take a concern and either remove it or reduce it. But we only can do that if we've asked for what are the things that people really want to achieve. Resources, again, 59% of IT projects were not on time, on budget because of resources. And I don't know about every organization, but my guess is that many organizations today have some resource constraints. And when I don't have the resources, I'm already anxious to do the job, there's frustration. And under resources, we normally think of just about, budget or equipment or people. But one of the real issues is, what is the resolution path? And that's not a common term. So what I'm trying to say is, when someone gets confused, when someone is in conflict or tension is building, who do I go to clarify it, to set priorities between three things? I can have one team member wanting to do X, another one wanting to do A, another one wanting to do L. How do we resolve it? I have to have access to that person who can help me resolve it. And this is one of the reasons why a change leader, a project manager, has to stay involved. The old idea was, I'll give you marching orders and you just salute me and you execute. That doesn't happen anymore. And we really have to start thinking about the complexities of dealing with change in today's world, because salute and execute is not going to work. And I don't mean this to demean anybody, but we have to really think more carefully about what is needed to make sure that things continue to progress. I just would like to mention to you that I had a client who was going to introduce a new marketing product, and it was great. And the launch was fantastic. And customers responded immediately, and they called in to get information on it. They had done a launch, they had done the advertising, they had done the newspapers, they had done everything necessary. Do you know what they forgot? They forgot to give scripts to the customer service reps. So when all these new customers called in for this new product, the customer service reps didn't have any idea of what was going on. Again, we got to look at the resources, including not only the people on the project team, but some other folks that are going to get impacted along the way. So the last piece is something that you all know pretty well. It's the action planning, and how important action planning is. But it needs to be a lot more detailed than has been historically with plans. We're going to launch, we're going to execute. No, we got to do a lot of stuff in between. So what I would like to just suggest to you is that a lot of times the image of a symphony is used as a perfect example of teamwork. And it really is. I mean, we all know it's beautiful music. But do you know that the violin section gets a different score than the brass section, and they get a different score than the percussion section? Again, are we doing the action planning down to the level where we can deal with the differences in an organization and not just have one overall plan? Do we know the critical path? And are we monitoring it enough? I was watching 60 Minutes once when they told me that when I'm driving, I adjust my hands on the steering wheel every 9 to 12 seconds. Check that out when you're driving. Do you adjust your hands that much? Even if you're stopped, for more than that, you'll start up and you'll be turning the wheel. That indicates the speed of change that is happening in something as simple as driving. Do we have that understanding and those plans to deal with those potential surprises that exist in an organization? So the level of action planning has to be so much more detailed that it just says, hey, we're starting, we're going to execute, and then we're going to, reap all the benefits that's going to become. So, be specific, identify the critical path. And what's really also interesting is monitoring it and letting people know that if they see a ripple, if they see something coming up, they're going to get rewarded for letting me know if I'm the project manager. Because what happens is frequently in many people's minds, if I identify a problem and take it to my leader, my manager, my whomever I'm reporting to, I am seen as a problem person. And the only thing I'm told is, well, Mary, you identified this problem, now you go fix it. And so there's a gap between what we know and what we share. One of the things that can happen when you announce a change is that some people resist it. And some people are brave enough to come out and actually say what their concerns are. If you really want to know what's going on, thank the person that identifies the problem. Do not make them have to be the sole person that fixes it, and make sure that you show appreciation for that early attention to the issues. So, there's a phrase, the devil's in the details. The details are the action planning. Make them detailed enough so people know what to do, when to expect it, and plan for their time and for, the level of cross-functional collaboration. I did some work at the National Science Foundation, and the National Science Foundation, as you can guess by the name, is the top scientists in every different field. And when I worked at NSF, what I found was that everybody was very functionally oriented. So, the people who were in some kind of biology would be very collaborative within that field, but they may not work with somebody who's doing something in organic chemistry. And so a lot of the change efforts these days they require a lot of cross-functional collaboration, information sharing, and that is not the norm. We have gotten to the point of specialization is so detailed and so specific that we're so proud of all the details we know that we don't realize that we need to still work with other people to make things happen. This cross-functionality is not a given in any action planning. So I gave you all the negatives, and I feel a little guilty about that. But let me start with some positives. When the vision is clear, there will be clarity. We understand what's to be done, how to do it. We want to do it. We have the resources to do it, and we know what to do when. When we know we have the skills or capabilities, I can have the confidence to tackle something new. Because there are a lot of people that will say, if I don't know what to do new, I'm just going to keep doing what I've always done. And by the way, sometimes I got rewarded for keeping doing what I've always done. So if I don't have that confidence, then I won't take the step forward that's necessary to make the change happen. If we have a level of incentives that people are committed to personally, not just to overall the business case, we have engagement. And that engagement counts because that means we'll share information. That means that we will take responsibility for filling our accountabilities. If we have the resources in place, what we'll have is a higher level. This is a commitment. I will make sure that I get this done, even if it's after 5 o'clock or even if it's on my own time. I am committed to getting this done. And if we have a good action plan, then we have advocacy. And what I mean by advocacy is that I am not only going to support the project, but I'm going to encourage other people to participate, that I can step in, even if it's not my accountability. I'm an advocate for this plan, and I'm going to take care of something if something is shifting that no one else is taking care of. So I've talked about the negatives, but please understand that the positives have a great deal of power to make change successful. And if we don't make change successful, what happens is we waste resources, we waste energy, we waste our reputation. There are certain organizations that have handled change extremely well. I could go back in time to the Tylenol case when people were inserting poisons into Tylenol and how well they handled that. And we could also talk about some organizations that have not handled things as well. So do I have that level of commitment and advocacy for my project where I make it a priority to do that? I mean, every day I set my priorities. I set what I want to accomplish for the goals for the day. Where is that change effort and that level of priority that I have set? And when we make it an advocacy level, it will get done. And that is what makes change successful. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm going to give you a little pitch that I did write this all up in a book called Leadership, not leadership, Leadership, Saving the Herd. It tells a fable about a sheep herd that has suffered drought and they have to move to a new pasture, but to get to a new pasture, they have to swim across a river, and sheep don't like to swim across a river. And then the rest of the book gives you all the questions that you need to ask under each of the 5 components: vision, capabilities, incentives, resources, and action planning. And I promised to leave time today for questions or comments, feedback, disagreements. So I'd like to know if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, folks, feel free to just come off mute. I don't see any in the chat, but you're welcome to add one in the chat or just any questions you have here.
I'll kick it off. So in your experience, which of the components do organizations most commonly underestimate or skip, would you say?
I actually think it's the incentives piece. It's putting the benefits in terms that people can attach to and make it important. Again, I think we've passed the period where people just come up with stellar titles for a vision. I think we've gotten past that. I think we're recognizing some of the skill shortages that we have. But I do think incentives is the most difficult. I think the whole field of project management is a way to address the weak action planning we have had in the past. And this idea of continual monitoring and making the small adjustments before they become hugely impactful. So the question I would ask is, what are the questions that you're asking in any change that you're contemplating to make sure that you cover the 5? But when I want to cover incentives, it sounds a little self-promoting. So those usually don't get addressed as carefully. So we need to be asking them, what could go wrong kind of questions, because what people answer to the what could go wrong problem is their biggest concern, their fear, their apprehension. So making that question easy for people to respond to is terrific. And again, when we ask questions, we have to ask open-ended questions. I mean, if you ask me, will you support my project? I know what my answer is supposed to be. It's yes. But we need open-ended questions without becoming leading questions. And one of the things that's interesting is that any question that is more than 8 words long is leading people to a particular answer that the questioner wants to hear. So, check out what the questions that you're asking and make sure they're not yes or no questions, because I always know that bipolar answer always means I'm supposed to say yes. And make sure that they're not leading to a conclusion that I have decided is the uh, conclusion that I'm expecting and have already found a way to deal with. I would also say that when it comes to incentives, we have to use what I call active listening. And active listening has, when it started out, it meant one thing. What active listening means now is something very different. So if I'm active listening in the current process, you talk, you stop, I just summarize what you said. There's really no exchange going on. What active listening should be is you talk, I thank you for that and say, let me get back to you. And that when I come back with a way to bridge the difference. It isn't just repeating back to you what you said because you already know what you said. That's not advancing the conversation or understanding the change effort. We have to go beyond it and find ways to bridge concerns because a lot of those concerns can be dealt with. Just an example from the fable: the sheep didn't want to swim across the river because their wool would get wet. When the wool gets wet, they could drown. And so the solution was to have the shearing before you did the swim. Again, when you know what the concern is, you can address it. You just can't ignore it. So when you ask a question, what could go wrong? What could happen? What are the surprises that might appear? Then you're going to get some idea of things that need to be addressed, but it also will show you what their concerns are, what incentives they want, or what their fears are. We do have more fear that we don't voice, and we have to get that out in the open and try to find ways to solve it.
Thank you. And I really do appreciate that. And actually had someone tell me this morning a very large project that's been going on for a couple of years where we feel like we've talked about the benefits to campus, but one of the internal team leads was like, how is this helping me? How is this helping my team? Where is my team's incentive beyond we want to help the university? So appreciate
And
that.
sometimes the incentive can be, let's say you're doing something that's going to help, I'm going to say students. You know, does any of the feedback of success from the students ever get to the people doing the work? This whole concept that we're doing well and so I want to keep doing it gets overlooked. We don't celebrate as much as we should. We sort of say, hey, we did a good job, we're going to start a new job. We don't take the time to hear the feedback and to get the recognition and the rewards. I mean, when I started working, the only way to get recognition, I was told, was to walk fast in the hall so you look busy, carry a lot of paper so you look like you're busy, and make sure that you walk frequently so you're visible. And if I'm walking the halls with paper all the time, I'm not doing my job. So we really need to make sure that people get recognized who have earned it. And I know that one time I was in an office and where I was an employee, and my manager came in and said, "You're not doing anything." I was thinking, action planning in my mind takes some thought. Creativity takes thought. Again, we tend to recognize activity more than we recognize accomplishment. So again, whatever you can do to recognize folks, it registers.
Yeah, Jackie, I saw maybe you had a question. You were going to come off mute there.
I did. Um, so Mary, thank you for this. This is super helpful. One of the things you mentioned early on was about change can be introduced at any level of the organization. Um, some of us, I don't know how many of us, but are pro-sci trained, which, pro-sci touts that sponsorship is the key indicator of success. How do you tie those two together, or do you think that they're two independent things?
I think anybody who supports you is a key player. So I think sponsorship is very important. But I have to say that sometimes I start with a sponsor and they leave me because they turn on to something else. And so, what am I going to do to keep that sponsor on board? And one of the things that I find is the more I tell that sponsor how we're progressing, the more likely they are to stick with me. Again, a lot of the leaders talk about quantified measures, and of course, they're very valuable. But I don't want you to ignore the qualitative examples and stories. There's some people say that the oldest way to communicate is with a story. And so if you have some stories of how your progress is impacting somebody, or how creative your team has been to overcome something that was unanticipated, that's great. But I do think we tend to think of the sponsors at the end, at the start of the program, and not recognize that we have to keep them on board throughout the program, because I call it my evaporating resources. I can get resources from my sponsor at the beginning of the project, and then like a month or two into it, that sponsor has reallocated the resources to someone else. Not meaning to in any necessary way to diminish your project, but there's an excitement, and I always want to do something new, and I feel like I should be launching things. And so keeping a sponsor on board is important. But my concern is the word sponsor usually means stakeholder or a chancellor or some other title. What I'm trying to say is that the sponsors also need to be considered the implementers and the people impacted. I can't remember the years, but I will say it's been 50 years ago, the United States decided to go metric. And I will still talk to you in inches and feet. I know that metric exists. I can do it, but I don't. And at the same time, nobody around me does it. So a very simple thing that doesn't require a lot of intellectual prowess as adopting the metric system has not been adopted. And what's the reason? I have no need. The people I talk to talk about miles, feet, and inches, so I can communicate with them. I know that on my speedometer they have kilometers, but I only look at the miles. There was no incentive for me to adopt the metric system. Obviously, if I want to work overseas, I have to use the metric. But there are a lot of people in the United States and Canada, well, maybe not Canada, but in the United States anyway, that still will use the old English standards. So sponsorship's important, but it has to be maintained. It can't just be won and taken for granted. And sponsorship has to be at every level, because one person, one talent base that doesn't follow through on an accountability on a project can really create problems. I'm not saying that I mean to, but I'm saying that if somebody doesn't do a task when it needs to get done, it can throw a wrench in a lot of things. So, yeah, sponsors are important, but broaden it, please.
Thank you. That was super helpful.
So in the chat, how do you recommend leaders use this model when they inherit a change initiative, maybe already in trouble? You mentioned earlier that taking the model left to right. Would you add anything else to that?
I would start actually by asking people what has gone well. Actually, there are 4 questions that I would like that person to ask. What are we doing well that we should do more of? What are we doing that we should be doing less of? What should we start doing that we're not doing? And what should we stop doing that we are doing? So if you do more, less, start, stop, as a new person taking on a change initiative, it shows an objectivity, a willingness to listen, and you're going to get a lot of information. Some people rely on information from groups. So I'm going to have a whole team there, and we're going to maybe talk about those 4 questions, but you also have to give people a chance to individually respond. There's a wonderful process that a new leader to a change effort could do, that I would recommend. And that is to bring them together, put up flip chart paper or whiteboard or whatever you want, and say, what are the issues we should be addressing? And then leave the room. They are then free to say anything because it won't be associated with them. And then you come back, read it, and gather the team back together and say, these are the things that we're going to do to address these issues. So I would say start with collecting information on all 5 areas, but don't be too narrow. Just the word incentives. I like the word. I don't like the word motivation, but my bias. But incentives does sound a little personal. One of the jokes I sometimes make is that, if I offer you a $5,000 increase in salary, it is a change, but you won't call it a change. You will call it progress. The minute somebody says this is a change, they are not sure that it's good. Your job is to help them be good, just to see the good, I'm sorry, and then to deliver the work. And there's another phrase that I enjoy, that is execution. Execution. Change without execution is an illusion. So, a lot of people start and are very proud of something, but if nothing gets done, you can say I introduced something on your resume, but it isn't an accomplishment. And so we have to move from just talking about change to looking more at the execution process, because I think we have historically undervalued that process.
So the model you came up with in that process, are there some other things that you really considered maybe having there that maybe you thought ended up rolling under, or, something else that's still really important but might not be shown there? One I was thinking about is, and this is probably rolled under the action plan, is that feedback loop that, like, once the project's done, there's still work to be done sometimes. It's not one and done and over. We still need to have that kind of continuous cycle of feedback and improvement. So maybe that's where something like that lives. But I was just curious if there are any things like that in your process that came up and kind of how you dealt with them.
Ellen, you identified it. It's communication. The whole issue, every area needs communication. And if we don't have that, whether that's feedback, whether that's a problem identification in a timely manner so a ripple doesn't become a tidal wave, whether it's potential conflicts or whether it's a timing issue, I need to have that communication. I was talking about celebration, and that is a recognition and reward thing. And the more you can handle the communication, the better. But I think it goes under each one of those 5 because I think it is so consistently needed. We are so distracted by so many different things that if we don't stay in communication, we're going to have a trouble. I just took on a job as head of a charity organization, and the vice president said something to a program chair that wasn't what we agreed on. And I'm lucky that I was told from the program person, what was going on, because otherwise I wouldn't have known. So what is the process that we are using, to make sure that people speak up, and those that speak up get recognized? If you're in a meeting and you ask Mary to speak up, and I speak up, and you say, "Why did you say that such a thing?" Well, the message to me is you don't want me to speak up. You could say, "Well, that's an interesting question." I don't have to have the answer if I'm the person who asked who's been addressed. I could just say, "Let me look into that." I think people don't ask questions because they're afraid they're going to get a question that they can't answer. And that is harmful to everyone. So the more we can ask questions and show that we're going to be objective, the more likely that we'll get the communication flowing that will keep us on track. Because, I mean, to me, the monitoring of progress is so critical, and it sometimes is not done in a timely fashion. Again, my experience is probably not what you all doing, but that was my experience.
So our call today here is really a mix of our groups. So we've got our project management group and we have our organizational change management and communications. And so we've got people in varying degrees of these roles here. Is there advice on how to best work together, things to not do, thinking about our groups and joining here today, ways for us to work best together on our projects and our other work because our roles are all kind of different, but definitely cross.
I, I'm going to come out of left field with this. I would say humility. I think the more we're willing to say that we're listening and that we don't know everything, and that I'm not going to be a cheerleader, just pumping you up to agree with me, to show that you actually respond. It's interesting to me to see how many times people can ask a question and somebody will say thanks, but they don't get back and say what I did with it. So I can be, if I present myself as all knowing or 100% sure of myself, you're not going to be as likely to keep giving me information because the assumption is she thinks she knows it all. So I would think that some level of being willing to step back and show that you respect other people by not asserting that you know everything. And it's really counter to what has historically been a way to get ahead in an organization, was to present confidence, to be forward thinking, to be creative, innovative. And so I think those are interesting things. But if I am presenting to you as an all powerful Wizard of Oz, you're not going to give me the feedback that keeps me informed. It's just not the same thing. So whether you're a project manager or something that is a change initiative, show confidence, but be humble about the fact that you need the information, that you don't have all the answers, because no one has all the answers. So I know it's maybe a strange answer to your question, but I think that as a project manager or as a change leader, you know you can get the job done. And so since you know that, you don't have to project that on others, and you can do a better job of listening and they'll do a better job of sharing.
Anybody else have any questions?
I'll ask one more unless someone has one. So, I mean, I really appreciate this model, and just wonder if you have any recommendations on kind of a diagnostic approach to using it, right? Like in the middle of a project, seeing that there's some issues. You mentioned the left to right, but is there any other kind of diagnostic approach you would suggest in trying to understand the missing components?
Well, what I do is I have a list of questions for each one in the book. I can I can share a summary of those if you wish, but it starts with questioning, and one of the things that you could ask somebody is, if someone's on your team, is, have you heard any concerns? I mean, the more you depersonalize it, you say, it's not, Ashley's concern, it's not Ellen's concerns, it's anyone's concerns. I can get information. So, I mean, if you want answers, you have to ask the questions. And so the questions become critical. And I think in the book, there are 9 or 10 for each one of those 5. But I think I've got a summary sheet of 4 or 5 questions. If you want, I could share that.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I wish you all the very best. The education of our students, all of our folks, are so important. I wish you continued success. Thank you.
Thank you. And for folks on the call on our agenda, we started a LinkedIn group for our special interest group, so feel free to follow and interact. We did limit it to the UNC system so we can have our folks to interact and share with. And thank you for Mary for joining us, and let us know if y'all would like to collaborate again as our groups to have another speaker. We've got our next couple dates listed for our group, and I think that's it, unless Jackie or Sarah, y'all have anything else we should mention?
The only thing I wanted to mention, because I know we have a lot of people who don't necessarily have change or communications in their title or maybe even in their job description, that does not preclude you from joining our group. Um, we're kind of open to everyone who has anything to do with change. And I think as Mary showed us, like driving, right? You make changes all the time. So please, everyone is welcome to join our group.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Gail,